Have you ever felt the power of water? Have you ever stood in a stream where it's hard to keep your balance? Have you ever stood at the ocean and witnessed the strength of the waves that were crashing into the shore? I have. When I was in the 6th, maybe the 7th grade, I went to a place called Lakey, Texas with a friend of mine named John. And I was able to go on one of his family vacations, which turned out to be kind of a family reunion. And the reason really why we went is because it was the middle of the summer and it was hot. And Lakey is known for having a river that runs through it called the Frio River, which people like to go down whenever it's hot and float that river. And so the first day that we got down there, we went to the store, we bought him some water shoes, we got an inner tube, and we went to this section that had a bridge over it, and then there was kind of a dam where there was a small culvert that was the lowest point, and so water was just pouring out. And there had been a lot of rain that year, kind of like this year, and so there was this massive kind of almost flooding situation of where that culvert was. And John and I shared this inner tube. He went first. He went up about 50 yards before the culvert, got into the water, floated down, screaming woohoo, as a good middle schooler should and would do. And then when he tried to stop, he put his feet in the water, and the water being so strong, sucked the water shoe right off his foot, never to be seen again. And so feeling no pity for the little hobbling boy, I took the inner tube, went right up to ride those same waves, right through the woohoo zone, and when it was my turn to try and stop, I couldn't. The power of the water was too strong, and it wasn't that it was too deep or that I didn't have a good footing. It was simply I wasn't strong enough. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was completely outmatched. And I knew that water this powerful could just wash me away. Water is powerful. It persistently pushes against any and every object in its path. In flooding situations, it leaves a scene unrecognizable by washing away anything and everything and destroying everything in its path. Against its power, few things can stand. Only those things that are grounded firmly with a strong foundation. I'm going to be looking at Psalm 1, Psalm 15, and Psalm 52 this morning. We're going to actually start, not in Psalm 1, we're going to start in Psalm 15. And before we start there, I want to give you a little background. We're going to be talking about the contrast today between the righteous and the wicked. And one of the greatest questions asked today is, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, the Hebrews asked a slightly different question, and that is, why do good things happen to bad people? Why are these people that are cheating and stealing and murdering in order to get ahead, why are they prospering? And they want to ask God why, just like we want to ask God, why do good people suffer? And so in reaction to that imbalance of justice, several sections of the Bible are written to reassure the people of God while they are not to lie, cheat, steal, murder in order to get ahead. And so with that in mind, let's read Psalm 15. O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue and does no evil to his neighbor nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change, who does not put out his money at interest and does not take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. And it says, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? And the tent that's being referred to is the tabernacle, the holy place of God in the midst of Israel. And you'll remember the priests had to go through this really intense purification process before they could even enter in. And so the question that's being asked is, who can just come willy-nilly into the holy presence of God? When it talks about the hill, I think of Sinai, where Moses saw the burning bush and had to take his sandals off, where the Lord appeared to him to give him the 10 Commandments, and where Moses asked, Lord, can I just see you? To which God says, no man can see me and live. The presence of God is an awe-inspiring place. And the question is, in this psalm, who is divinely welcomed guest into the holy presence of God? And the answer that it gives is he who walks blamelessly and does what is right. The one who upholds the law and even goes beyond the law. And so the remainder of this psalm talks about what a righteous person does in obeying the Lord and also his relationship with other people of God. And I love that it ends with this. He who does these things shall never be moved. I can think back to when I was in high school and I was with my youth group and the pressures of high school and how they were so great, and I felt outmatched as a lot of us did. The sinful pressures that were surrounding me. And I think of a couple guys in general that were a few years older than me. It only seemed like they really got it maybe 2 weeks out of the year while we were at camp. They'd go to camp, they'd sing the songs, they'd hear the devos, we'd be close with the people in the community of God, and then as soon as camp was over, it was back and returning to the woohoo, deceitful nature of sin. And I think to them, and I see where they are now, and they let the pressure of this world convince them that being blameless was not worth it. And so like my friend John's water shoe, their faith has just been washed away. Sin is powerful. It persistently pushes against any and every one in its path. In some situations, it can leave a person unrecognizable by washing away who they used to be and destroying everything that they once stood for. Against its power, few people can stand. Only those who are grounded firmly with a strong foundation. The way that the Grand Canyon was formed, at least the theory behind it, is twofold. The first is that there's these continental plates that merged against each other and began colliding. One went over the other, and it forced the landmass to go up in elevation. That's how the Rocky Mountains were formed, but it also raised the elevation of the land around it. The second is that the Colorado River, like a hot knife through butter, carved out the canyon and eroded away that water as the elevation rose. And then subsequent rainfall would come, and it would go from the higher elevation of the canyon walls to the lower elevation of the river canal, and it would leave a further changed landscape. And that's how we have the Grand Canyon today. And what it would do is it would take these massive boulders as large, sometimes it's been documented as large as semi-trucks, and it would shove them down the river, and it would erode the area around it. Water is powerful. It persistently pushes against any and every object in its path. In flooding situations, it can leave a scene unrecognizable by washing away everything and destroying everything in its path. Against its power, few things can stand. Only those things that are grounded firmly with a strong foundation. If you would, turn to Psalm 52. Psalm 52. It begins with an introduction to the choir master, a maskil of David. When Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul, David has come to the house of Ahimelech. I want to give a little background to this psalm in particular. See, David had been on the run from King Saul, largely because King Saul was jealous over David, and he was also driven mad by a crazy spirit. And we'll see that, really how that plays out even more in just a second. But David's on the run, and he's hungry. He doesn't have a place like Burger King or McDonald's where he can just run for a quick bite. He is going to depend upon the hospitality of others, and he had to leave quickly, so he wasn't able to take a lot of belongings with him. He doesn't even have a sword, we find out in this story. And so he comes to a place called Nob, where there's a bunch of priests. It's really a holy city. And he asks one of the priests named Ahimelech if he and his men can have some food. And Ahimelech says, the only thing we have is some bread. And so they give him some bread. And strangely, in the middle of this story, there's a little insertion that says, and Doeg the Edomite was there. And he witnessed all that happened. And so later, at the time, you think, where's that going? But then it pops back up later in the story when Saul asks, has anyone seen David? I'm trying to get my hands on David. And Doeg speaks up. He's able to get back to Saul, and he says, I saw him in Nob, and the priest there fed him some bread. And so Saul, being driven mad, mistakes this gift of hospitality by the priest for an act of treason, and he orders his men to go to Nob and to kill them. And his own men are like, this is a ridiculous quest. We're not doing it. And so he says, okay, fine, Doeg, go kill these people. And Doeg does. Not only does he kill 85 priests, he kills all of the men and all of the women and all of the children and all of the infants and all of the ox and all of the sheep and all of the donkeys of the city of Nob. He destroys all of life in that city. And it's in the wake of that atrocity that David writes Psalm 52. Why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? The steadfast love of God endures all the day. Your tongue plots destruction like a sharp razor, you worker of deceit. You love evil more than good, and lying more than speaking what is right. You love all words that devour, O deceitful tongue. But God will break you down forever. He will snatch and tear you away from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living. The righteous shall see and fear and shall laugh at him, saying, see the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and sought refuge in his own destruction. But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the steadfast love of God forever and ever. And I will thank you forever because you have done it. I will wait for your name, for it is good, in the presence of the godly. So David writes this psalm in the wake of destruction, trying to answer the question, why do good things happen to bad people? Why is Doeg able to prosper and receive accolades and probably riches from Saul by killing God's people? And really what's the purpose of this is that he won't. In the long run, God will have his vindication. And so what he says is, why do you boast of evil? And it's almost like he's saying, do you not know that the steadfast love of God endures all the day? And this is not a passive love. This is not a love that when a child is made fun of at school, he comes home and his mother comforts him saying, that's okay, baby. I love you for who you are. That's not this kind of love. This is the type of love that when a mama bear sees her cubs being messed with, she goes over and rips their face off. I mean, she is upset to see people messing with her baby. It's an active love that drives a mother bear to action. And it is because of God's steadfast love for his people that he will vindicate them. And so I want to mention this. We're going to get out of this story just for a second, because I do think it connects. Doeg is an Edomite. An Edomite comes from the people of Edom, the descendants of Esau, Esau being the brother of Jacob. And so really, they're somewhat relatives of Israel. They're kind of a brother nation. And so when Babylon comes onto the scene and is about to actually sack and capture Judah, Judah sees what's going on, and so they form an alliance. They grab these other nations from around them saying, we're going to be destroyed by Babylon if you don't, join forces. And Edom is one of those people on that team, on that alliance. But when Babylon comes to the scene to sack the city, guess what happens? Edom does not fight with Israel. They turn their backs on Israel, and they fight instead for Babylon. And it's because of that betrayal that the Lord is furious against them. In fact, that's why the book of Obadiah, if you know anything about the book of Obadiah, it's very short, but it is an oracle against the nation of Edom, saying, what a foolish decision it was to trust in the power of men. Do you not know that I am the Lord? Surely vengeance will be had and you'll be destroyed. And later, we actually see that the people of Edom are actually wiped off the map, as God said. In the book of Malachi, God, it's strange the way that the book is introduced, but God says, I have loved you, Israel. And Israel responds, how have you loved us? And God's answer is, because I have loved Jacob and hated Esau. And his point is that because Esau betrayed you and you were my children, like a mama bear, I went and am going to rip their face off. It's an active love. The steadfast love of God executes justice. And so this psalm is written to reassure the person of God that the love of God is a love of retribution and vindication. And the righteous man can look and see how foolish it is to be wicked, and they can laugh. And so I'll end Psalm 52 with this. Ultimately, we don't really know what happens to Doeg. But he does, you can say, get what's coming to him. Because with the same measure that he poured out against the city of Nob, destroying all life there, the same measure is poured out by God upon all of Edom, upon Doeg's descendants. And so I guess you can say that justice was sweet, and it was served cold. The steadfast love of God endures all the day. I have a friend named Alex. We met in 6th grade, and we were friends from 6th grade to 12th grade. And it was in that 12th grade year that he started hanging out with a different crowd. And they really were not a good influence on him, and it made him start questioning his own identity. Should I give in to this wicked way, or should I continue being this nice boy that I am? Well, he ended up getting into trouble at school, was sent away for about 6 weeks for something he shouldn't have done. And whenever I saw him again, it was as if everything had changed. 5 years had gone by. He was a completely different person. And it's because of 2 reasons. He had an isolation from good influence, and he also had this internal struggle over his identity. And one won out over the other. And because of that, the entire landscape of Alex's personality changed, much like the Grand Canyon. And it's because he was purchased by sin. He was overcome by the waves of sin. And I read Psalm 52, and it reminds me of people like that. People who I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen too, that at one point they kind of get it, but it's not worth it. And so they trade what is good for what is evil, and they boast of evil. Why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? Do you not know that the steadfast love of God endures all the day? We see these people, and so many people in our society, trade the wickedness for righteousness and say, wicked is greater than good. This is the power of sin. Sin is powerful. It persistently pushes against any and every one in its path. In certain situations, it leaves a person unrecognizable. By washing away everything that they once stood for and destroying who they used to be. Against its power, few people can stand. Only those who are grounded firmly with a strong foundation. I was able to go to Maine last summer, and I was able to go to the Nettle Lighthouse, which is located in York, Maine. It's the most visited lighthouse in the Northeast. And what was really interesting to me is that it was placed as far out on the mainland as possible. And I saw these massive waves come crashing against these rocks that were surrounding the island that it was built on. And it reminded me of a video that I once saw of these massive tidal waves come barreling into a lighthouse. And you expect for the lighthouse to be destroyed by these massive waves. You're expecting to see it shattered to pieces. But that's not what you see. Once the mist clears, you see that lighthouse still standing firm because it had a strong foundation when it was built, and its light was still shining out to the sea. Water is powerful. It persistently pushes against any and everything in its path. In flooding situations, it can leave a scene unrecognizable by washing away everything and destroying everything in its path. Against its power, few things can stand. Only those things that are grounded firmly with a strong foundation. And it's with this we turn to Psalm 1. Blake read it for us just a moment ago. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. Do you notice the verbs that are used describing really what the wicked man is? There's a natural progression there. It goes from walking to standing to sitting. And so instead of sojourning, coming and going, all of a sudden you get really comfortable with sin. And so you don't start walking anymore, you start standing. The next thing you know, you're sitting and you're becoming much more comfortable with sin. And it's because the persistent pressure of sins becomes more and more comfortable. And the wicked don't notice the progression because it's slow and steady. There's a great song by a band that goes like this. It's called Slow Fade. It's a slow fade when you give yourself away. It's a slow fade when black and white have turned to gray. Thoughts invade, choices are made. A price will be paid when you give yourself away. People never crumble in a day. It's a slow fade. And my friends that were in the youth group, my friend Alex, they didn't really just change overnight. It was a slow fade. The persistent pressure of sin slowly became more and more comfortable, and it was worth it not to be blameless. Let's trade evil for good. And it changes the landscape of people's lives. And so with so much pressure, how does one not succumb to the persistent nature of sin? And that is what we learn when we look at the righteous man. See, the righteous man does not fall into the indulgences and practices of the wicked, but instead invests his time wisely by putting his hope and his trust in the law of the Lord. Psalm 119 is entirely about the beauty of the law of the Lord, and it just expounds upon Psalm 1. Its point is that the Word of God is an anchor and a foundation for the righteous. You see, the righteous man does not stumble into these wicked ways because he's firmly grounded in the Word of God. And he delights in the law of the Lord. It says that he is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season and its leaf does not wither. See, in our world, in the piney woods, we're used to seeing a bunch of trees. But imagine you're in the the Middle East. Imagine you're in the Middle East and there's really just a lot of desert sand, a lot of wilderness. There's not a whole lot of trees producing fruit. If you see one of these trees, it's probably nearby a stream of water. And so it's a welcomed sight, much like a lighthouse is a welcomed sight for weary travelers. We live in a society that's very fearful. And so often I hear, and honestly, sometimes I'm the one who says, I'm worried about where this country is headed, about where it will be when my children are my age or older. We're scared about the moral bankruptcy of our society. And you and I both have friends and family members who we've seen succumb to the immoral pressure of the world. And we're scared about the influence and what it means for our children and for the future of the church. We're scared about our candidates that are poised to take presidential office. We're scared about other nations that hate us because of religious differences. We're scared of foreign leaders who are crazy and just throw temper tantrums and want to nuke people. And if you watch the news at all, you have a really good reason to be fearful. because you know the power of sin and how it so easily corrupts and destroys. You know that sin is powerful, that it persistently pushes against any and every one in its path, that in some situations it can leave a person unrecognizable by washing away who they were and destroying everything that they stood for. And against its power, few people can stand. That only those who are grounded firmly with a strong foundation. So the question is, what are we supposed to do about it? The answer is not to be fearful, but to be faithful. It's the job of the lighthouse to be steadfast in the midst of chaos. It depends on its solid foundation to not be moved and destroyed by the impending waves. And likewise, it is our job to be steadfast in the midst of this chaotic world. We must depend on our foundation to not be crushed by the waves of temptation. Our foundation comes by delighting in the law of the Lord, by letting his word be a lamp to our feet and a light to our path, as Psalm 119 says, because the word guides us, because it reveals God to us. And the reason so many are crushed by the waves of sin is because they never take root in the Word of God. And because they never take root, they never know him. So I want to end with this, with verse 4. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. And therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. It's time for a confession. I have misled you. The verse about the power of sin is really a mirage. It's what we believe in fear, not what we believe in faith. It's not that the righteous cannot stand against the power and the pressure of sin, but that sin cannot stand against the steadfast love of God. That mama bear, face-ripping, vindication-giving love of God that executes justice. The reality of the situation is this: God is powerful. He persistently pushes against anyone who will let him. He leaves people unrecognizable by washing away who they were and destroying everything they stood for, leaving them blameless. And most importantly, against him, no one and nothing can stand. This morning, you might find that you have succumbed to the pressures of this world, that you are scared and that you're fearful. And I want to encourage you to instead be faithful by seeking refuge in the Word of God and by knowing God through his Word. If at all you have felt the pressure of sin come into your life, I want to encourage you that God is the one who's powerful. That he's the one who can wash away who we used to be and everything that we once stood for and leave someone who's blameless. If you need to respond this morning, I want to encourage you to do so at this time while we stand and while we sing.